The security envelope was heavier than I expected. I stood in the kitchen, holding it in both hands, thumb pressed against the seam, watching the light from the window glint off the gold line printed across its corner. The rest of the house was silent except for the clock ticking over the dishwasher. I'd found the envelope tucked nearly out of sight, wedged between my husband's old accounting ledgers in the back of his office closet, behind the box where we kept our marriage certificate and the kids' birth announcements. It should have been just receipts, maybe old tax documents, maybe nothing at all. Instead, my name was nowhere on the label, and the address wasn't even ours. I told myself not to imagine the worst. But as I slid my nail under the flap, the skin along my arms prickled with a kind of slow, rising certainty. There were statements inside, crisp, multi-page statements printed with unfamiliar logos, all bearing my husband's name, and dates that reached back more than a decade. Each sheet revealed an account number and a balance that seemed impossible, almost offensive in its abundance. Accounts I had never seen before. Holdings I had never heard mentioned. The numbers were not small. Some accounts listed 6 figures. One, in particular, nearly reached 7. And the signature line at the bottom, scrawled in my husband's sharp, practiced hand, made my breath stutter in my chest. He'd told me, so many times over the years, that our money was tight. That the house, the kids' tuition, my mother's medical bills, stretching the budget was always a negotiation, a trade-off. His voice haunted the walls of the kitchen as I stood frozen, my hands shaking ever so slightly. "We're doing the best we can, Jen. My name is Jennifer Wilcox. I am 43 years old. I work as a high school English teacher, and I live in the suburbs outside Boston. I have been married for 18 years to Michael Wilcox, who manages accounts for a mid-size investment firm. We have 2 children and a mortgage, a sensible car, and a brick colonial with a maple tree in the front yard. This is the story of how everything I trusted began to fall apart. I suppose I should explain myself. There is a certain kind of person I always thought I was, reliable, honest, the glue of a family if not the star. I kept the calendar for school events, handled the bills as far as Michael let me, baked birthday cakes from scratch, and called my mother every Sunday evening. My world was small but stable. I thought that was enough. It was only after I found that envelope that I understood how much of my life had been built on secrets, how much had been hidden from me, just out of view. The week before I found the envelope had been a mess of small, ordinary frustrations. I had stayed late for parent-teacher conferences, missed dinner with the kids, then come home to find Michael's car already gone from the driveway. He texted that he was at a late client meeting, but I didn't really believe him. I'd started to wonder about those meetings, how often they slipped onto his calendar, how little he told me about his days. The kids, Sarah and Noah, were arguing over the television remote. My mother had called 3 times, worried about a new prescription her doctor had given her. I was tired, and I didn't want to look for trouble. I just wanted, for once, to feel like things were taken care of. But even then, in the middle of my everyday chaos, little things didn't add up. Michael's mood had been off for months, distracted, tight-lipped, quick to irritation. He was careful with his phone, answering texts in the hallway, never leaving his laptop open if I walked into his home office. At dinner, he steered conversation away from money with a kind of practiced ease. "We're fine, Jen," he would say. "Don't worry about it." I told myself not to pry. I told myself 1,000 quiet lies. Our finances had always been a point of tension, but I thought it was the normal kind, the anxiety of 2 working parents balancing the endless demands of children, home, and aging parents. Michael made more than I did, but not by much, or so I thought. He paid most of the large bills, handled the taxes, even set up an automatic transfer from my paycheck into the joint account every month. Sometimes, if I asked, he would show me spreadsheets, budget projections, savings goals. But his explanations were always just technical enough to slip past my questions. "You know, I'm more comfortable with this stuff," he'd say, and I'd let him have it, relieved not to have to worry. When my mother's health began to decline, money became tighter. Michael said we couldn't afford the in-home nurse my mother needed. I believed him, cut corners where I could, bought store-brand groceries, canceled a planned family trip. I even borrowed from my own retirement account, thinking we were all just getting by, that someday things would get easier. There were moments, even then, when I caught a glimpse of something out of place, a large deposit Michael couldn't explain, an unfamiliar charge on the credit card, a missed call from a bank I didn't recognize. He brushed it all away as mistakes, banking errors. "It's all a shell game, Jen," he'd say, half smiling as if he were letting me in on some harmless joke. "The money's all spoken for." I didn't push. I didn't want to be the nagging wife. I thought, if I showed him trust, he'd give it back in kind. I was wrong. It was a rainy Sunday afternoon when I finally confronted the envelope. Michael wasn't home. The kids were at a friend's house, the dog asleep in a sunbeam on the living room rug. The house was so quiet I was startled by the sound of my own breath. I'd gone to the office to look for an old photo album, something to cheer up my mother, who was in a rehab facility after a fall. Instead, while pulling down boxes from the upper shelf, I'd knocked loose a folder, sending it skidding behind the filing cabinet. When I reached down to retrieve it, my hand found the edge of the security envelope. I pulled it free, saw Michael's name, the unfamiliar return address, and felt a cold, creeping sense of dread. As I read through the statements, page after page of balances, deposits, and transfers, I began to piece together the shape of Michael's secret life. There were offshore accounts registered in the Cayman Islands, investment portfolios in his name only, property deeds for a condo in Florida I'd never heard about. The oldest statement dated back to the year Sarah was born, when Michael's promotion at work allowed us to buy our house. I remembered how he'd insisted we couldn't afford a bigger place, how he'd made me feel guilty for even suggesting it. The numbers were staggering. I did the math in the margins, pen shaking in my hand. The hidden accounts held more than $500,000, maybe more. All this time, while I juggled bills and denied myself small comforts for the sake of the family, Michael had been squirreling away money, carving out a private stash, a future I was never meant to see. I sat at the desk, the envelope open before me, and felt the floor tilt beneath my feet. My trust in him, in us, seemed to dissolve all at once. That night, Michael came home late. I listened to his footsteps in the hallway, the muffled sound of him tossing his keys on the kitchen counter. I pressed the envelope flat between the pages of an old book and waited in the bedroom, pretending to be asleep. I heard him moving around the house, checking the locks, pausing outside the office door. I wondered if he knew what I had found. I wondered if he cared. For the next week, I watched Michael more closely. I checked our joint accounts daily, noting every transaction. I searched for more documents, rooting through his files when he was out. I found nothing else as damning as that envelope, but I did find evidence of careful planning, password-protected folders on his laptop, a small safe in the back of his closet that I had never seen before. The combination, as it turned out, was our wedding anniversary. Inside the safe were more account statements, a passport in Michael's name, and a list of contacts, bankers, brokers, lawyers. There were no notes addressed to me, nothing to suggest that I was meant to discover any of it. It was as if I had stumbled into a parallel universe, one in which my husband was not the man I thought I married, but someone else entirely, secretive, calculating, unburdened by the needs or wants of his family. I tried to imagine a benign explanation. Perhaps Michael was planning a surprise, some grand gesture, an investment, a gift for our anniversary. But the evidence was too overwhelming, too cold. The money had been hidden for years, growing steadily, untouched by the expenses of our life together. I thought about the conversations we'd had about my mother's care, about the sacrifices he'd insisted we make, all while he hoarded wealth in the shadows. I thought about Sarah's college fund, the trips we never took, the arguments over the cost of groceries, the nights I lay awake worrying about the future. I thought about the way Michael looked at me lately, distant, distracted, as if I were nothing more than an obstacle to be managed. I couldn't sleep. I kept replaying the past in my mind, searching for signs I had missed. Every memory now seemed tinged with suspicion. The way Michael had always insisted on handling the finances, the way he brushed aside my questions, the way he'd once snapped at me for snooping when I asked about a credit card bill. I remembered the time I found a receipt for a wire transfer to an unfamiliar account, and how he'd laughed it off, saying it was just a client reimbursement. I remembered how he'd dismissed my concerns about the future, about retirement, about the kids. "I've got it under control, Jen," he'd say, smiling that thin, practiced smile. I realized, with a kind of bone-deep weariness, that I had been a fool. My trust had been a gift he neither valued nor deserved. I thought about confronting him, about demanding the truth, but I wasn't ready, not yet. I needed to understand the full scope of his deception. I needed to protect myself, and my children, from whatever fallout would come next. The first confrontation was not a planned one. Michael came home early one evening, finding me in the office surrounded by piles of paperwork. His eyes flicked to the open folder on the desk, the envelope half-tucked beneath a stack of bills. For a moment, he looked startled, almost afraid. Then his expression hardened. "What are you doing, Jen?" he asked, voice low, a warning threaded through the words. I fought to keep my voice steady. "I found these," I said, holding up the envelope. "Do you want to explain?" Michael's face closed off, the way it always did when he felt cornered. "Those are just investments. Nothing you need to worry about. I handle this stuff so you don't have to." The old, familiar argument. But this time I didn't back down. "Michael, these accounts, why are they in your name only? Why are you hiding money from me?" He shrugged, a practiced gesture of annoyance. "It's complicated. Work stuff. Some of it's for taxes, some for clients. You wouldn't understand." I set my jaw. "Try me." He stared at me, his eyes flat and cold. "Jen, you have no idea what you're talking about. Just leave it alone." That night, we did not speak. Michael slept in the guest room, the door shut tight. The next morning, he left for work without saying goodbye. The weeks that followed were a blur of tension and silence. Michael avoided me, spending long hours at the office, taking calls outside, locking his phone every time he set it down. I kept searching for answers, piecing together the fragments of his deception. I called the banks listed on the statements, pretending to be Michael's assistant, gathering what information I could. I spoke with a friend, Sarah, whose husband had gone through a messy divorce, asking questions I tried to make sound hypothetical. Sarah listened, her eyes wide and sympathetic, and gave me the name of a lawyer she trusted. I made the appointment under my maiden name. The lawyer, a calm woman with a kind face, listened as I explained my situation. She asked for copies of the documents, and I handed over the statements, my hands trembling. She scanned them quickly, her brow furrowing. "This is clear evidence of hidden assets," she said quietly. "If you decide to divorce, you'd be entitled to half, possibly more, since he concealed them. But you'll need proof, more than just statements. We need a paper trail. Transfers, withdrawals, evidence that the money was marital property." I nodded, numb. "He's always been careful. I don't know what else I can find." She gave me a gentle smile. "If the accounts are real, there will be records. And if you need help, I can recommend a forensic accountant." I left the office feeling as if I were moving through water, every step slow and heavy. The reality of what I was facing began to settle over me, the possibility of divorce, the threat of losing my home, my family splintering apart. I thought about Sarah and Noah, about what this would mean for them. I thought about my mother, who depended on me for care. I felt trapped, alone, with no one to turn to but myself. At home, the atmosphere grew increasingly strained. The kids noticed the tension, though I tried to shield them from it. Sarah, now 15, grew sullen and withdrawn, spending more time in her room. Noah, 11, asked questions I couldn't answer. Why is Dad always mad? Did I do something wrong? I tried to reassure them, but the words felt hollow in my mouth. Michael, meanwhile, became more secretive than ever. He changed the passwords on his computer, locked his filing cabinets, and began carrying a second phone. He moved money between accounts, sometimes draining our joint account down to a few $100s without warning. When I confronted him about it, he snapped, "I have to cover some business expenses. Don't worry, it'll all be fine." But it wasn't fine. The more I dug, the clearer it became that Michael was preparing for something, positioning himself for a future that did not include me. He stopped coming home for dinner, stopped sleeping in our bed. I found emails, half deleted, fragments of correspondence with brokers, lawyers, even real estate agents in Florida. He was moving pieces behind the scenes, and I was the last to know. One afternoon, Sarah came home from school in tears. She'd overheard her father on the phone, talking to someone about moving out and making sure the kids don't blame me. That night, Michael told me, with a kind of detached calm, that he was considering a separation. "Maybe it's for the best," he said, not meeting my eyes. "We're not happy, Jen. You know that." He made it sound like a mutual decision, as if I had been a participant in the slow unraveling of our marriage. But I knew better. I had been kept in the dark, sidelined while he built a secret life, a financial fortress I was never meant to breach. The next day, our joint account was emptied. The credit cards were cancelled. The mortgage payment, due in a week, hung over my head like a guillotine. I called Michael in a panic, but he didn't answer. When I finally reached him at work, he was cold and dismissive. "It's just a temporary measure," he said. "I'll handle it." I realized then that I could not trust him to handle anything, not my money, not my future, not the well-being of our children. I was on my own. I met with the forensic accountant the lawyer had recommended. He was brisk, efficient, and utterly unflappable. I handed over everything I had, statements, emails, notes on Michael's recent behavior. He promised to dig deeper, to track the flow of money through shell companies, offshore accounts, and trusts. Over the next few weeks, I worked with the lawyer to build a case. I gathered records of every transfer, every withdrawal, every document I could find. I combed through years of tax returns, looking for discrepancies. The accountant found evidence of Michael funneling money through a shadow corporation, one he'd set up before we were even married, using a friend as a front. He traced the movement of funds from our joint account into the hidden accounts, sometimes in amounts just below the reporting threshold. The evidence was damning. Michael had not only hidden hundreds of thousands of dollars from me, but he had done so with careful, deliberate intent. He had lied to me, to our children, to everyone who trusted him. The lawyer moved quickly. She filed a motion in family court to freeze the accounts, preventing Michael from moving any more money. She presented the evidence to the judge, the statements, the transfers, the paper trail that led from our family home to offshore tax havens. Michael was blindsided, unprepared for the depth of information I had gathered. When the court order arrived, Michael's world began to unravel. His accounts were frozen. The real estate deal in Florida fell through. The trust he'd set up was dissolved by court order. For the first time since this ordeal began, I saw a crack in his facade, a flash of fear, quickly masked by anger. He called me, shouting, demanding to know how I'd done it. "You had no right, Jen," he yelled. "This is my money. You've ruined everything." I listened in silence, letting him vent his rage. When he finally stopped, breathless and bitter, I said quietly, "You hid money from your family. You lied to all of us. What did you expect me to do?" He hung up without another word. The divorce proceedings were long and painful. Michael fought at every turn, trying to regain control of the accounts, trying to discredit me in court. But the evidence was overwhelming. The judge ruled in my favor. Half of all marital assets, including the hidden accounts, were awarded to me and the children. Michael was forced to liquidate the offshore holdings, pay back taxes, and cover the legal fees. His reputation at work suffered. Word spread that he was under investigation for financial misconduct. Friends and family, once loyal to Michael, began to distance themselves. Even my mother, who had always adored her son-in-law, saw him for what he truly was. The kids struggled with the changes. Sarah resented both of us for the chaos, though in time she understood more than she let on. Noah missed his father, but gradually grew closer to me. I worked hard to keep our home stable, to rebuild what Michael had tried to destroy. My mother's health improved with proper care, paid for with the money Michael had tried to hide. In the aftermath, I found myself both relieved and hollowed out. The victory tasted like ashes. I had won back what was rightfully mine, but at the cost of my marriage, my sense of certainty, the world I had trusted for so long. I moved through the days like someone recovering from illness, better, but never quite the same. I learned to manage the finances, to make decisions without Michael's shadow looming over me. I hired a financial planner, set up college funds for the kids, paid off old debts. The money, once a source of anxiety and conflict, became a tool for stability. But it never felt like a windfall, it felt like restitution, a balm for wounds that would never fully heal. Michael moved into a small apartment downtown. We spoke only when necessary, always about the kids. He never apologized, never admitted what he had done. Sometimes I wondered if he even understood the harm he'd caused, or if he saw himself as the victim of my betrayal. There were moments, late at night, when I missed the idea of what we'd had, a partnership, a shared future, the comfort of not being alone. But those moments grew fewer with time. I learned to trust myself, to rely on my own judgment. I learned that secrets, no matter how carefully hidden, have a way of coming to light. This is not the story I wanted to tell. It is not the life I would have chosen. But it is mine now, shaped by loss and survival and the quiet, stubborn refusal to be diminished. I walk through my house in the early mornings, light spilling across the hardwood floors, and I think about everything I have learned, about trust, about truth, about the cost of secrets. In the end, I do not feel triumphant. I feel changed. I feel awake to the world in a way I never was before. And when I breathe in the silence of my own home, I know, I have earned this peace, imperfect as it is.